Hello, my name is Lisa Durant, Research Analyst at Nemertes Research, and welcome to our monthly webinar entitled UC Costs, Efficiencies, and Staffing Shifts, presented by Robin Garris, Nemertes President and Founder, and myself. This webinar consists of an interactive presentation and moderated Q&A period. To submit a question, please use the control panel on GoToWebinar. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact webinars@nemertes.com. Upon conclusion, you will be presented with a short survey. Please answer the questions to provide feedback on this webinar and content for future webinars. We also ask if you would like to participate in our research, and in exchange for your participation, you will receive access to our research. A replay will soon be available for viewing on our website. So with that, let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to turn it over now to Robin Garris.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, and welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about a topic that's near and dear to me. I've been conducting this research now this is our 11th year, and we've got some great findings this year, some very interesting findings, and some that surprised us, and frankly, others that we, that we presented it to most recently at Enterprise Connect. So without further ado, let me get started. So we're going to start with just looking at the agenda here. I'll talk a little bit about Nemertes. I'll go into some information about the methodology and the demographics of this research project. I'll spend some time talking about the business case and what kind of checklists you can use as you're building your own business case at your organization. And then we'll look at some of the different deployment types and what the cost figures are associated with those, cloud as well as on-prem. And we'll look at some of the management and monitoring not so much the tools, but the costs associated with those who are using the tools. And I'll wrap up with some recommendations and some more information from us on our next webinar. So first, a little bit about Nemertes. For those of you who don't know us, we are, I think most of the people on this call do, but we're a research and strategic consulting company. We focus on analyzing the business impact of emerging technologies. So we're not the company that's going to cover every single technology under the sun, but those that we do cover there in the blue square, we cover those very deeply. We go in and really do a lot of research, both interviews, talking to IT leaders and the vendors and service providers of those technologies. But we also do conduct some survey work as well, but we always, in any research project, start with interviews and really make sure we get to the whys behind the whats and really talk to people and understand what they're doing. And we'll hear a little more about that with this particular project. So yeah, as I said, we do conduct benchmarks, we conduct surveys, we do vendor discussions as well, and then we provide a lot of different services with that information. So we have a research advisory service. We also use the data that we get in our research to help with our consulting projects. So as we're helping companies build, let's say, for example, a UC strategy and roadmap, or if we're helping a company build a UC business case, we rely heavily on this research data. So when we're giving you recommendations, we're giving them to you based on some really hard data rather than, just sort of, well, what's our best guess as to what's going to happen. So anyway, and the other thing that we have, of course, is an annual conference. I just wanted to make sure that folks know about that. Nemertes Navigator 360, it's July 25th to the 27th this year at the Lowe's Don Cesar Resort. If you've never been there, it's just a beautiful resort. It's a National Historic Landmark, wonderful beach. But more importantly, the topics and the discussion and the peer networking that you're going to have there is just fantastic. The last 2 years, every attendee, every person who came to the conference, literally in our feedback survey, said that they would return. So very high ratings, a very good conference to get some thought leadership out there, and we also do drill down into the technologies as well. So if you want any more information about that, please, by all means, reach out to us. You can reach out to me personally at robin@nemertes.com, or clients can always reach out to client services at nemertes.com, or those who are not clients, but if you're interested, you can reach out to sales@nemertes.com or myself. So that's just a little bit about the conference. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more about the research. So a quick disclaimer, I just want to be clear that no vendors sponsored or commission this research. This is a project that we do every year. We conduct this independently on an annual basis, and vendors or enterprises may become clients of this research to gain access to the detailed cost data and a lot of them license reports around it. And this presentation here really gives a summary of the findings. We actually have a very massive database around this now, over spanning several years, as I mentioned, but we really can drill into a lot of details of cost, whether it's by size, by vendor, correlating 2 data points, 3 data points, whatever we want. So there's a lot more behind this. This is really just to give you some of the high-level findings and what some of the key trends are that we see. So we did conduct this research from January through March. We interviewed 25 IT leaders, and those interviews really help us establish the parameters for the project. So we, once we establish those parameters, we go out to survey to sort of, get more data, and we use those interviews to, to basically tell us what's a reasonable low and high when we look at certain cost data points. And we also gather a lot of really deep cost information and drill down on that, and we certainly ask a lot of whys behind the what. So altogether, we were just under 300, data points, or not data points, 300 participants in this research this year. It was actually 299. And as we go into that survey data, I just want to be clear that we conduct a very stringent integrity checks. We look at every data line by line. We definitely have very high standards as to what data we keep and what we don't. If we see that somebody's clicking buttons and not paying attention, we do not keep that data. So we do also in this research focus on the primary vendor. We know that many companies use more than one provider, but we really ask them when they're looking at their technologies to focus on their primary provider, and we do split it between IP telephony and UC suites. One of these days we're hoping we can get that all combined into one, but I'm sure as many of you realize, it's even though you may buy the products, both IP telephony and UC from a single vendor, a lot of times what we're seeing still in organizations is that either A, they don't, B, they may buy it from the same vendor, but it's 2 different groups buying and managing it, or C, they do buy it all at once, but there's not a lot of coordination internally as to who's doing what. The sort of the telecom and network people are managing the voice side of things and maybe audio conferencing, and then the messaging people are managing all the unified communications, instant messaging, presence, maybe some of the video and web conferencing capabilities. So far, we continue to keep IP telephony and unified communications separate. When it gets into cloud, there's a little bit more consolidation, and I'll get to that in a minute. And we do evaluate the data by vendor and size when a sample allows. So there's certain times, like our cloud data, we're getting more and more every year, but we still don't have as much cloud data as we do on-prem data. So we can do some divisions by vendors, but when you get to vendor and size, the samples get a little bit small. So we do the best we can with that. So I just want to kind of go over the importance of total cost of operations. We're really talking more about operations here, not ownership, especially as you get into the cloud environment. But the trend is really that there is a growing demand across all the organizations for less complexity. Even though you've got a lot of demand from business units to have a lot of features and functionality and capabilities, they want that with less complexity. And they also want better integration, customization, and of course the cloud-based options. But there are limits to that as well, and the main limits are that you have an increasingly constrained IT budget and IT staff, and that's causing a lot of problems. Now the challenge, of course, is, well, we've got to deliver flexible, integrated, easy-to-use communications and collaboration to any endpoint. So kind of putting all these together, we really do always have to look at the costs, but not just the costs, also the value. So what are we getting for the money that we're spending? And is it okay to spend a little bit more if we're getting more value for the dollar? So just to give you a little bit of an overview as to how we measure everything, the numbers that you're going to see here, for on-prem deployments, we look at capital, implementation, and operational costs. So for capital, this includes everything from PBX to endpoint devices and licenses, servers, other hardware. In some cases, it might be some bundled licensing. And we take all those capital costs and basically divide by the number of endpoints, meaning handset, soft phone, audio conferencing bridge, etc. On implementation, this would include the staff time and third-party, consultants and integrators, and we take the staff time, we multiply that by the loading factor, which is, benefits and taxes and everything, and we divide that, of course, also. Oh, I'm sorry. We also add the third-party costs and then divide that by the number of endpoints as well. Operationally, we look at a few different things there: staff time, equipment maintenance, third-party managed services, and then training and certification. Again, make sure that the staff compensation includes all the benefits and taxes, add up the other components that we have there, and divide by the number of endpoints. So we always have a cost per endpoint. We do pretty much the same thing with cloud, except we divide by the number of licenses. Because and moving forward, we may end up switching to that in the prem environment as pricing structures change. But for right now, on the cloud deployments, we do divide by number of licenses that you have for your subscriptions. The monthly service fee is also part of that. We sort of put that into the operational costs as we're doing modeling. Okay. Okay, so just a couple other things on demographics. This is the sample that we looked at here, and this is looking at the number of employees. So about 36% have fewer than 500 employees, 28% 501 to 2,500, and then 35.5% more than 2,500. So we're a little bit more heavily weighted toward larger companies if you compare that to a typical demographic of the business population. But we certainly see larger companies doing a lot of interesting things in the UCC space. Also a broad range of industries. You can see here, this is a roll-up of the industries. We have detailed breakdowns here. So, within financial services, you can see the percentages of investment versus banking versus insurance. Education goes higher education, K through 12, et cetera. So there's breakdowns here, but this just gives you an idea of, from a higher level, what industries we have included. Now, anyone who participated in this research did have to have a role in either IP telephony or unified communications and collaboration. They had to either make decisions, be the decision maker, influence decisions, or manage the technology itself. And as you can see here, in both sides, IP telephony and unified communications, we had a lot of people. The majority were, between the two, were definitely either making or influencing the decisions. Compensation data, I'm just kind of throwing this out there. I thought it might be interesting for the IT folks on the line today. The average loaded salary for those who are specifically managing, maintaining, dealing with break fix and whatnot on IP telephony is $75,872. Obviously, it varies by size of company. And the average loaded salary for UCC professionals is a little bit higher, $81,264. So that is based on this year's data. It has gone up a little bit from last year. The other interesting point that we had in this year's research data is that we do see companies moving more toward a chargeback model, so being able to go to each department and charge back a cost per employee for the services that IT delivers. So right now about 35% roughly are actually doing that, and another 17% are doing showback, so they just show what the charges are, but they are still absorbed centrally in IT. And then a little under half, about 47%, actually just pay for everything through a central IT budget. But among those who are not doing chargeback today, a third of those are saying they're developing a chargeback program. And the main cause for that, the main reason for that is just to engage business units more, to make sure that IT is actually delivering what the business unit wants. We don't want to deliver a bunch of services or applications that nobody's going to use, because that's not real good for job security. So, the thought is, well, if you have the business units, if you give them an IT budget that they have to pay into IT, and you give them options of what they might like, it's going to make IT much more responsive to the real needs of the employee population. So, obviously, in this one, we also did gather data on specifically how much companies are charging. So we do have that data in the research. So what do companies charge for, what do they charge back for IP telephony and UC suites and video conferencing and email? Those are the areas that we gathered. Okay, so just going into a business case, if you're looking at developing a business case right now, I have a few quick slides that kind of show you some of the things to think about. We'll get into some of the numbers then. But one of the big things is to spend the time that you need. I find as I'm developing business cases with people that they want to rush through this phase. No one really likes, well, I shouldn't say I love building business cases, but a lot of people that I work with don't really like building business cases. They want to just get into the technology, get the applications up and running, start training employees on how to use it, but they don't want to spend the time building the business case. And I always think that this is a very important thing to do. It's something you don't want to rush, because if we're in a point where IT budgets have to be cut. We have another crash, and the economy tanks, and boy, we have to cut things. If you have a business case that shows what the value is of the particular project or the particular new applications that you're working on, the chances that your budget gets cut are much less, because you have that business case. You've gone through and done the work, and that translates into more job security, to be honest. So don't rush this part. A successful business case can actually take about 3 to 6 months for smaller mid-sized organizations, and then even up to sorry, up to 18 months rather, for large organizations. So try not to rush this process. I think it's well worth the time spent for the reasons I mentioned. And part of that time has to be spent knowing the numbers that you have. So you've got to know what your numbers are for, from today's spending and today's operational metrics in order to see where your delta is to the new way of doing things. So take the time to get those real numbers, especially if you're in a large organization. This might take some time for people in finance to actually get you the real numbers, but really understand what you're spending today, and then also organizationally and operationally really understand how many FTEs are actually doing each of the functions you're looking at. And that can get challenging, and I know this when I interview people, because they'll start saying, yeah, one person does that, two people do that, but then when you really drill down, it's like, well, that one person's also doing X, Y, and Z too. So, it's probably about, 20% of that person's time that goes to the function we were talking about. And the other two, well, yeah, they're also doing 8 other functions, so maybe it's, 40% of their time. So it behooves you to take the time to understand the actual operational numbers, and don't guess at that, because that's going to really show where you're saving money, where you're not saving money, and where you need more people, where you don't need more people, how to organize your staff. We have gathered some numbers on that I'll share with you today. And take the time to learn, what do the business units want? Before you even spend time building your business case and really looking at what applications and what technologies you should be using, go talk to the business units. Find out what they want. Find out what they're looking for. What are some of the challenges that they have, and how can you solve those challenges through the use of technology that they may not even be considering or they may not even know. Also, absolutely look into security, especially if you're going to a cloud model. Make sure that the cloud provider matches your security and compliance requirements, and to understand the constraints that you have and the changing viewpoints, not only in your own organization, but throughout the industry, throughout your particular industry, and with your provider. I think it's important to take the time there to help you with your cloud analysis. I've worked with a lot of companies where we go in to do a UC strategy, but they don't want to bring the security people in because they say, oh, they're just going to tell us what we can't do rather than what we can do. Well, for one thing, I think that's changing a little bit, but for another, I think security people end up doing that because they get called in toward the end, and they're like, well, wait a minute, you want me to, pull a rabbit out of a hat here. I needed some time to work through this, and you didn't give it to me. So I think bringing the security team in right away and really having them be involved in the project and the roadmap really helps. And then, of course, measure your numbers that you have today. So look at like the success metrics that you want to measure, your organizational statistics, so that you have a basis for comparison. Because once you change, like say you're on-prem now, you're going to cloud or hybrid, once you change, it's hard to go back and remember exactly what the success metrics or the staffing really was before you made that change. So in order to make sure the change is successful, make sure you know those numbers right ahead of time. And then explore the options. Cast a wide net, both for providers and service delivery. So, if you're not dead set on staying on-prem or going to the cloud or doing a hybrid model, look at all the different options that are out there. Take the time to do that. Don't automatically assume that you should stay with your incumbent provider. There's a lot of innovation going on out there. See what else is out there. And I also would say don't make so many assumptions about the cloud. I've talked to a lot of companies that say, yeah, we're evaluating the cloud, but we actually think that we're just going to stay on-prem because of whatever misconception they might have about the cloud. So, definitely look into that and see the innovation in the cloud is happening pretty quickly. Now, one other thing you might want to keep in mind is we find that there's a lot of overlooked or poorly estimated costs and savings, and I've listed just some of them here. On the cost side, integration is always something that's underestimated, so make sure whatever your estimate is for integration, probably triple that. Professional services, bringing people in to help out in certain areas. Management monitoring tools, a lot of companies don't even budget for those until years 2 or 3, so you might want to make sure you're looking at those right up front, because you'll see later in the presentation that those who use management monitoring tools actually have lower operational costs. They do help. Network capacity, whatever it is that you're going to do, whether it's add video conferencing, whether it's adding a perpetual chat application that has video capabilities, how is that going to affect your network capacity, and what are those costs going to be, more importantly? What do you need to do with the LAN? Do you need to do upgrades? Do you need to change cabling in certain buildings? Do you need PoE or UPS? What are those costs? And those can add up unexpectedly as well. Training, what are you going to spend on training, both user training and IT training? And marketing internally to employees. This is more getting toward user adoption. A lot of people that we talk to say, we have all these technologies out there, we have all these capabilities, but none of our employees know about it because we're IT, we're not marketers. We don't have all the clever ways of getting the word out to the employees like, like a professional marketer would. And then staffing, of course, for partner management as well as BU interaction or business unit interaction. So those are some of the costs you have to think of. On the savings side, a lot of efficiency savings, and I'm going to be doing some more analysis on this because through this research we did gather a lot of information on what companies are saving and various, or how they're translating productivity and efficiency into dollars. There's nothing that I would say is universal across every company, but there are a lot of examples that are, that we see, somewhat repeated in certain industries, but you can see some of them here. Travel reduction, increase in sales because you have access to data and experts through some of the collaboration tools that you have. Certainly a lot of focus on improved customer satisfaction scores, resulting in better referrals or more interactions that result in upsell or additional sales. So that's something to start tracking and, just seeing how when you make a change in the technology or the channels that you're delivering, how does that change those numbers. Real estate even, utility and utility savings that are driven by enabling virtual workers. Project life cycle or product as well, just shorter time to market enabled by unified communications and collaboration. And then remote diagnostics, you think about things, whether it's healthcare, whether it's manufacturing, just having remote experts available to help solve a problem. How does that save money? Even long distance costs, I know it's not an efficiency metric per se, but yet we are still seeing companies show savings, particularly in international long distance. And then, of course, in the network as well, especially driven by SIP trunking. So those are just some things you can use as a reference point as you're building a business case. This chart also gives you a reference point just to kind of show, the areas you want to look at in the colors, capital, operational, implementation, and productivity costs. And in the boxes outside of them, just what are some of the things that you want to be looking at within each one of those metrics. Okay, so with that, let's get into some of the findings. On the cloud side, this is a thing that certainly surprises people, but I think less so as time goes on. When I was at Enterprise Connect presenting some of this information, I had about a few hundred people in the room, and half the people were kind of surprised by this and saying, oh, it can't be costing more to go to the cloud. I'm going to save money going to the cloud, right? And then the other half who were already starting their cloud deployment or had finished their cloud deployment said, nope, this is exactly what's happening. It's right on. So we are, in fact, seeing that cloud is not going to save you money after about year one, maybe year two, depending upon when you're doing your capital purchases. So as you go on and look at your total cost of ownership, total cost of operations rather, when you're looking at the cloud, the subscription costs for your licenses and the staff costs are absolutely more expensive than an on-prem operational cost. Now, granted, you don't have initial capital outlay or depreciation unless, of course, you buy your own handsets, which about half of the companies still do. And then you still have your maintenance fees for that. But my argument is that I don't think cost savings should be the main driver for going into the cloud. I don't think that's the right argument to make. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. Really, agility is the key driver, the ability to be more agile, not only with the applications and the services that you deliver, but also being more agile with what you do with your internal IT staff. You can, if you can take the headcount, either with the people retrained or with new people, and show the value that IT can bring to the overall organization, and particularly to the digital transformation strategy, which a lot of companies are focusing on. By shifting that keep the lights on function over to your partners, I think you're doing a real good service to the company. The business units, even though a lot of the people within the business units are getting more tech savvy, they still need help connecting the dots to, okay, this is what I need to do, how can technology help me? And that's where I really think IT is going. So you're going to need slightly more staff for the cloud. It's about 6% more, and I'll get into the details. But more importantly, you need a change in your staff composition. So who's doing what? What kind of people do you need? What kind of experience, background, education? So we'll get into that. And some of the things that you don't want to overlook, which are part of that. Okay, so when we ask people about moving to the cloud, we ask them what is causing them or to actually move to the cloud, or what's causing them to consider it or move to the cloud. And interestingly enough, the perceived cost reduction is the most important, the most significant, most important driver rather toward moving to the cloud, followed by improved agility. I'd like to see those two switched. I think when we get to the point where those two are switched, people will be moving to cloud for the right reason. They also see that there's more features in cloud services than they're able to deliver in on-prem, that they really have to free some of the IT staff for strategic initiatives, as I was just saying. And about a quarter of people, about 25% of people actually say that the security concerns that they once had about moving to the cloud have now been addressed. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. And then 16% said that providers are investing more in the cloud than they are in on-prem, so it's like they kind of want to be where the investment is. Now, of course, when you look at the inhibitors, what gave you hesitation or is giving you hesitation, even though we had 25% say, yes, my security concerns are now addressed, 61% are saying, it's security issues that are causing me to, kind of put the brakes on here. So I would say that providers still have a lot of work to do, to really reassure organizations and decision makers that they can address the security concerns. Other inhibitors are whether they can keep control, letting go of the control of their capabilities and their upgrades. And this does also get to customization. So, you think about it, if everyone's moving to the cloud, there's cloud euphoria and everyone's going there, and now I have access to features and functionality at the same time as all my competitors, how do I differentiate myself, particularly in the contact center, but even beyond that, even in my own employees' capabilities, how do I differentiate myself? There really needs to be a lot of attention right now to customization, even when you're in the cloud. I mean, I could argue that even on-prem, you're limited to what your on-prem vendor is providing you in that solution. But that said, it's a lot easier to go to a third party and do a best-of-breed type thing, do your own integration, and get a feature that you really need out and about, when you want it. Other things, network constraints, and then of course, even though cost was, when the perceived cost benefit was one of the drivers, the biggest driver to the cloud, it's also one of the inhibitors as well, just the uncertainty as to what the cost is really going to be. So as we move to the cloud, you can kind of see what our numbers are through 2016, steady growth in every one of the technologies we're looking at, IP telephony, video, web, conferencing, instant messaging, email, and calendar. And they're going to continue to go up, some at different paces than others, but they're all increasing. Now, when we look at IP telephony and unified communications, these are some of the numbers here. These numbers are your annual operational cost per license. And this is for companies who are using IP telephony in the cloud, as well as, on average, 2 additional applications. So they might be using, web conferencing and instant messaging and presence. It could be any combination of 2 additional, sort of collaborative applications. So this is, but the one that they all are absolutely using is IP telephony, and you can see the difference here. The Cisco solution, just to be clear, is really looking at the Cisco platform the Cisco platform as provided by various VARs and some service providers, but there wasn't none of those within that Cisco VAR there weren't enough to be counted individually. Now AT&T had the most responses, and that one, it was a combination of Cisco, Microsoft, and then its own BroadSoft solution, but primarily Cisco solution there. So it seems like if you're looking at IP telephony in the cloud, that's a pretty decent solution. Now there are also others that were not, we didn't get enough responses on, that also have really attractive solutions. You can think of like ShoreTel, 8x8, MyTel, RingCentral, those kinds of companies. Also, and then even the providers like the Windstreams and the CenturyLinks, but we just didn't have enough response for them. Now Microsoft looks really high here, and the one point I wanted to make about Microsoft in this particular chart, in all fairness, is that the majority of Microsoft's responses in this particular research were for smaller rollouts, so naturally its cost per unit is going to look a little bit higher than the other organizations, because theirs all had kind of a mixture. Vonage was a little bit more smaller as well, so you can see that one being higher. But even taking that into account, Microsoft would have still been the highest, even if I break it down by size, when you're looking at IP telephony. When you get into some of the UC solutions and you're not looking at IP telephony, Microsoft's costs are actually very, very attractive, and we'll get to that in a minute. This also does not include handset rentals. If we were to add those into there, the median for that for a year, this is, by the way, annual, so yearly prices, that would add about 147 per unit to the median. So what this does include then is your subscription cost, and your staffing, your operational costs. How much is it? How much are you, spending on staff per year to help with, manage the solution? Now, handset acquisition with cloud IP telephony, most organizations are buying them outright, and the trending is a little bit more toward buying them outright. And you can see that if you're going to buy them, on average, companies are spending about $125 per handset, but that really does vary. It just kind of depends on what layer and what level of handset you want. Monthly rentals on average are about $12. And again, that also varies depending upon the type of phone you're buying. So when we look at staff changes, though, 6% overall increase to the staff changes as you move to the cloud. And why is that? What's happening there? Well, break fix, so those people who originally were dealing with day-to-day, break fix, technology-related things, now that's going down. Understandably, right? You're moving that to a third party. That should go down. That should continue to go down over time. Initially, you'll probably have more people focusing on that as the relationship gets established. Where we see companies spending more resources is in user adoption, business unit relationship, and partner management. The only exception I would say to this is with smaller companies. If smaller companies with, I'd say fewer than about 100, if you're fewer than 100 employees, you will see some cost savings moving to the cloud because you don't have a huge IT staff where you can start moving people around, and you basically have IT staff where you have one to maybe 3 people, and they're all wearing multiple hats. So the savings on the staffing there doesn't really happen. So we do see some actual real savings when somebody moves on-prem to the cloud in a in that environment. But in anyone beyond that, we definitely see a difference. And this chart here looks at all companies, all sizes. If we segment this, by the way, to larger companies, the delta between the before and after gets much greater. So what this shows you, I've isolated IP telephony. I also have this for UC as well. But what this shows you is the blue bars are before, so this is when you're in on-prem. The gold bars are when you've moved to the cloud. And we asked people what percentage of your your IP telephony, not overall IT, your IP telephony staff was dealing with break fix and technical issues before and then after. How about user adoption before and after? Business unit relationship and then partner management also before and after. So you can see that break fix goes down from on-prem to cloud, but user adoption, business unit relationship, and partner management go up. So you're devoting more people there. And by the way, in this break fix is 29%. I would expect this bar to continue going down. I really see that as like the initial year to 2 years when, depending on the size of the company, as you're transitioning over. In many cases, you still have a hybrid environment, and you're still having you have to deal with some integration issues moving into the cloud. In some cases, you have your internal staff dealing with Tier 1 support, and then you escalate Tier 2 and 3 to your partner. In other cases, it's just the reverse of that. You're dealing with Tier 2 and 3, and your partner's dealing with Tier 1. So it kind of depends. We see a lot of different, technical sides of this, but, this is what we see, at least in the initial move over to the cloud. I think over time we will see that go down even further, though. So the changes moving forward then, the business unit management, this is really, looking at really identifying and assigning individual people who have both IT and business background to working directly with the business units. This sometimes requires a replacement, so you still have the headcount, but you bring someone new in, or in many cases retraining. So you have someone who's a technology, whiz, but hey, they're ready to make a change in their career and they want to learn more about the business, so maybe they're getting retrained. The big thing that we really find successful here is as you work more with the business units and the business units start looking at IT as their trusted advisor, your budget is going to go up significantly, and I have a chart on that next to show you. Partner management, this is really just managing that relationship with your cloud provider, and you really have to have a two-way street for success there. I really look at this as a lobbying function, to be honest. If you want your partner, your cloud partner, to be aligned with your priorities, you have to have people dedicated to making that relationship successful. So you want to be able to, bend their ear when you want to say, look, this new feature has got to be in your next rollout. If it's not, these are the problems we're going to see. If you don't have people devoted to that, your priorities may not align, and then the next upgrade cycle that you were hoping for feature X might not be happening for 6 months because you're not kind of working that relationship. And then, finally, like internal marketing or user adoption, this is really making sure that people internally understand what is available, and then they're appropriately trained on that. So, adoption definitely will help drive the business case, because you don't want to come back next year after moving into a cloud environment and have your budget scrutinized again, and the bean counters say, hey, wait a minute, there's only 20% of our employees actually using this service. Why are we even buying it? Let's get rid of it. And there goes your job security. So it's really important to make sure that the employees at your company know what you offer, so that you don't risk losing your budget. So this is just a number that shows you when IT serves as a trusted advisor internally to the business unit, the budget is basically almost twice as much per employee as it is if they just look at you as a commodity provider of technology services. So this is just kind of a very compelling reason as to why you do want to make sure that you're always really interacting with the business units. Okay, so let's move into on-premises deployments and see what we've got here. The on-prem rollouts are, in fact, still the most common. Most organizations are evaluating cloud. In fact, almost every single person that I interviewed, of the 25 I interviewed, said that they were evaluating it. Now, how many actually moved to the cloud is still up for grabs. I think everyone's looking at it because they should. I think a lot of the larger companies will end up doing some sort of a hybrid deployment, because there are some things they really do feel that they can do better internally than a cloud provider can do. So there's a lot of evaluation going on right now. What we find is that a lot of the companies who are looking at cloud environments, especially the larger companies, are increasingly, sort of focusing on Microsoft and Cisco. I certainly understand why. Microsoft and Cisco are prevalent in other parts of the company, other parts of the IT infrastructure. But that said, I think it's important just to really look at what everyone's got out there. Microsoft and Cisco, while great products, maybe there's some more innovative stuff out there from others. So I would just encourage everyone to really cast that wide net, like I said earlier. Now, all that said, both IP telephony and UC costs are on the rise. I'll go into that and the reasons why in a minute. And the differences among the vendors, at least for IP telephony, are becoming less significant. So right now, most organizations, if you look at the red and the gold slices of the pie, most are still using multiple providers. But really, the goal is really to get to that green slice, which has increased. That piece of the pie is getting bigger, using the same provider for IP telephony and UC. About 37% of companies are doing that right now. And the reason more want to do that is just to get rid of the integration headaches. So that's really what we see right now as to how they're buying and what they're doing. Now, isolating in on IP telephony right now, we can see historically what's happened with IP telephony: capital, implementation, and operational, the three different cost categories I referenced earlier in the presentation. You can see that operational costs and capital costs for the last 2 years have gone down. This year, they've both gone up. Implementation has been steadily going up, and it went up quite a bit this year, and I'll explain why in a minute. But here's what we have when we look by provider. Now, overall, like I mentioned, costs have definitely gone up this year, but we see that there is still a difference between the providers. ShoreTel, if you look at all sizes of rollouts, ShoreTel remains the lowest at 907, and Microsoft is the highest at 1194. But for those of you who have been following this research for a few years, one of the interesting things is that the delta between all these bars is really getting much narrower. It used to be a much steeper slope. So that has changed quite a bit just in the last year. Things are evening out a bit more. The vendors are getting much more aggressive with their capital. They're much more aggressive with the negotiations on capital, and so we definitely see that sort of helping to even things out. We do also have data on interactive intelligence, NEC, and Mitel, but those were limited to smaller rollouts. So if I put their bars on this chart, they would look a lot higher, significantly higher than the rest of them, because it really is just focused on very small rollouts. So we do have that. We also have data available on all the vendors by the rollout size and type, like whether you want to look at operational costs or implementation costs. So there's a lot more data behind this. I just want to be clear that this is kind of the way to show you a summary. But when you look at first-year costs, what this is showing you, just also to be clear, what do each of these bars represent? They represent your initial capital for the first year, capital per end unit, implementation per end unit for the first year, and your operational costs for the first year. Now, once you get beyond capital and implementation costs, if we were to do TCOs on this, we can look at just what the operational costs are, and then those operational costs actually are lower than what you would see in a cloud environment. But of course, depending upon the size of the company, the actual cost per unit varies quite a bit, because obviously a larger company, you're going to multiply that number by a larger number, you gain economies of scale. So why are we seeing these cost increases? This surprised me even as I looked at this data, and I went back and looked at interview notes. I even called a few people and said, hey, what's going on here? And what we're finding is that capital is actually staying relatively constant. And I say relatively, even though it's a 7% increase year over year, I say relatively constant because of the comparison to implementation and operational. So where is that money going? A lot of companies are in a cycle, just to get new devices right now. So some new handset purchases, a lot of activity right now, even in the contact center. Though this data does not cover contact center, what we're seeing is that a lot of the contact centers are trying to pull more people in who aren't really contact center employees, or they're not contact center agents, but they want their subject matter experts to be able to access the contact center. So they're upgrading some of the devices so that they can do that. We definitely see more companies buying headsets. I've got some data on that, on what they're not what they're spending, but what they're using and what kind of premium they're willing to spend on headsets. Although actually, now that I think of it, I do actually have data on what they are spending on headsets as well. Just not in this presentation. And then also SBC. So those are some of the main capital cost increases. Implementation costs, those have nearly tripled. There's a lot more time spent planning and engineering now. Before, they would just get something up and running and then deal with integration later. Now, before they say something's even ready to use, they're dealing with integration during the implementation. So they're trying to integrate IP telephony with other functions. A lot of that is integrating it with the contact center for reasons I just mentioned, or mobility initiatives, or even collaboration. And because they're doing so much more here, there's a lot more use of third-party professional services, which are more expensive than internal staff. And then the operational side also shows an increase, about 32%. The reason for that, IT staffs are not growing, but the demands from the business units are, so they're using more managed services. And they're also spending more money on training, not of users, end users, but of the IT staff so that they can prepare more for the new integrations and service delivery, maybe changing architectures. And we are definitely seeing an increase in the cost for equipment maintenance from the VARs. Now with UC costs, so this is getting into the UC suite, integrated instant messaging, presence, web audio conferencing, unified messaging, etc. These costs had been dropping the last 2 years too, and capital continues to drop, but operation and implementation again going up, similar to what we saw with, not quite to the extreme, but similar to what we saw with IP telephony. Now, when we look at vendors with unified communications in the on-prem world, you can see the delta between the bars is a little bit more significant than an IP telephony. It's a little bit newer. We still haven't had things even out as much as IPT. But the reason I have a circle around Microsoft there, which I think is really interesting, is if you look at companies who are just using Microsoft alone. Now, let me be clear, this does not include telephony in here. Okay, not telephony, just the unified communications. So if you look at just using Microsoft for UC, it's actually really appealing from a cost perspective. But if you move down the line and you see that you're integrating Microsoft with anyone else, whether it's via Cisco, Google, whoever, the costs start going up. So the integration is definitely, here you can see it in black and white, integrating is definitely adding costs to the overall equation when it comes to UC, which is, again, why more and more companies are moving to a single vendor model. So why the cost changes here? Again, capital, is dropping for UCC by about 25%. And again, this is more competitive landscape and providers really battling it out for customer acquisition. We saw the same thing with IP telephony for about the last, up until this year, for about the last 5 years. Although I would say still that the vendors are being competitive, I just think it's that companies are buying more things right now. Implementation costs are increasing by about 60%. Again, just like IP telephony, more time planning and engineering, more integration during the implementation, and in this case, we're really looking at things like ERP and CRM, app integration, additional collaborative applications from other providers. So if you can't get a particular capability that you really want from your primary provider, bringing something else in and dealing with that integration right up front. And then also, again, more use of the third-party professional services. And then the operational increases, we see about 21%. We're seeing that the size of the deployments is going up. So, because the size is going up and what they're offering to that bigger population, there's just simply more to manage. So they are increasing the staff a little bit as to who's devoted to unified communications. And then, of course, we integrate more UC into more apps, and that's just continually growing. There's more vendors involved, and that requires more people to manage the vendor relationship. So that's another reason we saw some increase there. Okay, So looking at endpoints, soft phone utilization, we see about 30% of companies using soft phones at this point. Most of the providers are including soft phone licensing as part of their overall cost, but some knew the breakout for the soft phone, or others had paid for it separately, and the average there was about $50 per license on average. Now, when we look at what they're using, USB headset is a little bit more popular than either a USB telephone or a Bluetooth headset, but all are, fairly evenly distributed there. My expectation is that you'll see more Bluetooth headsets just to enable that mobility. Now, most people actually are willing to pay some premium for headsets. So the question that we asked was, how much of a premium over a basic $80 headset are you willing to pay for a top grade headset? And you can see here that almost everyone is willing to pay something. Only 7.7% said they wouldn't pay anything more. So everyone's willing to pay a little bit something for a better headset. And I think as we rely more on soft clients, soft phones, and realize how important a good headset is, you're going to see that increasing a lot. I will say, though, even though in many organizations, IT still buys, procures, evaluates headsets, in a surprising number, and during my interviews, I found that many said, what, this is up to the business units to buy their headsets. So this is a cost that's kind of like wavering right now between IT and the business units who actually buys their headsets. Okay, and getting close to the end here. Most companies still are not using third-party management and monitoring tools, which is a little bit concerning because I see a lot of good reason to use them, even in the cloud. It's not so much an active management in the cloud; it's more monitoring, really making sure the provider is doing what it says it's doing. Letting you get some dashboard. I think moving forward in the cloud, what I really would find highly important is just to be able to do more of those business metrics, to really be able to say, what's the business effect of this particular technology? Okay, so I was able to do function X this much better and faster. What does that mean for a business metric? I think that's going to be more what we're going to be interested in moving forward, especially with digital transformation strategies. But one of the big things I wanted to pass along was that those who do use third-party monitoring and management tools are actually, saving a pretty good amount of money here. So you can see this is a per unit operational cost. With IP telephony and unified communications, we're seeing a pretty decent savings, whether on-prem or on the cloud. IP telephony is not too compelling right now, on-prem, but certainly in the cloud for both IPT and UCC. And on-prem and UCC is pretty compelling as well. Okay, wrapping up with a few recommendations. I would say don't underestimate the importance of a solid business case like I mentioned before. Take the time to do it right. Use the figures, such as those that we presented here. Use some of these figures to make sure that you know what you should be spending when you're negotiating. You can make your case internally. There's a lot you can do there. And evaluate cloud because, yes, it's not for everyone, but it's something that you really should be looking at. And if you make the move, just be aware of the organizational changes that I mentioned here that could go along with that. And then job security, well, that's not, as big of an issue as you may think. I know a lot of folks I talk to say, well, we don't want to go to the cloud. We're putting our jobs at risk. But really, the move to, a cloud provider really means that you're just going to transfer your employees to different positions or retrain them. It's really a nice opportunity to be doing something different. And if you really like to do the technology side of things and you don't want to do any of this business unit liaison stuff or, work on partner management, then, probably moving forward, you're going to be more likely at a provider, cloud provider, or a professional services provider. It's not to say that enterprise organizations aren't going to still have technology experts in them, but they're probably not going to be doing as much as the day-to-day, functions. And if that's what you like to do, it's probably, time to be looking at other types of companies so you have a good growth path in your company. And then I would say work into your business case your plans for staffing, partner management, business unit interaction, and that user adoption and marketing, and focus on becoming a trusted advisor to your businesses, your business units, because that will be really, really helpful. Okay, so with that, I thank you. If a couple things. I know we have a few more minutes for questions, but if clients, those who want to any more information, cuts of data, anything additional, if you want to talk more about the research, how you might be able to use it, you can contact client services. The contact information is there. Non-clients can certainly contact sales. We'd be happy to have you as a client, and be happy to share with you what you can do with the research and what else we have. The next webinar, it's the great one. My colleague Erwin Lazar did some research on small room video conferencing. I know it's a small video. It's really small room video conferencing. And that's Tuesday, April 14th, same time, same place, 2 to 3 Eastern time. And Erwin did some really great research on what companies are doing with these small video rooms, so typically with 6 seats or less. What's driving them to use those rooms? Who are they using? What are they doing? What are they spending? What are their drivers? So that might be really interesting if you're looking at how you can enhance, leverage, or use more of video conferencing. So with that, we have a few minutes. I'll turn over to Lisa to see if we have any questions.
We do have some questions. So just a reminder that if you have a question, you can submit it through the GoToWebinar Q&A panel. And one of the questions we always get is about whether or not there will be a replay of this webinar. It will be available on our website, Nemertes.com, for a free replay. So you will have to create and sign into a free account there to view it. We do have a couple of questions, so let's see. The first one, how does UC versus UCAS, or UC as a service, vary by vertical? I'm not entirely sure if this is about on-prem versus cloud, but maybe if you can speak to any nuances about the verticals as well.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure the details of the questions there, like how it varies. Is it by user, by utilization, or I'm thinking about that. Maybe we can go to the next question, because I'm just not sure exactly what they want us to answer on that. Maybe the person can jump into the panel and be a little more clear on what specific angle that they'd like. That said, I mean, we absolutely have all this data divided by vertical, so those are cuts of data that we can run on any data point you saw here. We can look at what the verticals are doing. So maybe we can go to the next question.
Sure. All right, so the next question, are the costs on slide 27, which, Robin, was the cloud IP telephony bar chart with the 2 other applications, are those published retail license user costs?
Published license, those are what companies are actually spending. So we don't care about what the list price is or the published price or anything like that. We just ask them, what are you spending? So usually that almost always is less than the list price. So just to be clear on that.
Okay. So you mentioned that some people have some misconceptions about the cloud that they should reconsider evaluating. What are some examples of those misconceptions?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of them. I think, a lot of organizations have just, held steadfast that there are security issues that absolutely cannot be resolved. And I would say, a couple of years ago, there were definitely security concerns in the cloud. What about the integrity of data? What about, the ability of somebody to hack, all that. I think that we've seen a lot of good security technologies come into play that have made a lot of organizations, and in fact even the government, looking at moving into the cloud. I think the government's driving a lot of that just to make sure that that there's no risk to, well, I shouldn't say no risk, there's never no risk, but at least acceptable risk, I guess, of data being compromised. So I think that's the big thing one of the big things you have to look at is, what is your acceptable risk? I mean, you're never going to be 100% secure. So what is the acceptable risk, and what are you seeing in your on-prem environment that you may not see in the cloud, and vice versa, and what's acceptable for the value and the agility that you're getting going to the cloud. I would also say that there are some misconceptions going to the cloud on the other side, where people think it might be better than it actually is. In some cases, you might go to the cloud and think, oh, I'm going to get every feature right when it comes out, and that's not always going to happen either. You may be able to do something quicker than the cloud provider, so you have to evaluate that too. And basically say, okay, well, if the cloud provider is going to get features out within 30 days, is that acceptable to me when my own IT staff can get them out within 10 days? Am I okay with that because my IT staff can be working on other things? So really looking at the timing of things, of when features and capabilities and functionalities can actually happen. Some of the other things, I guess I would say, would be relationship management. I know that this is more of a, it's not so much about the technology, but as you're looking into moving to the cloud, I think that some organizations look at this as out of sight, out of mind. I think you really have to go into the cloud and evaluate it very rationally that this is not out of sight, out of mind. This is going to take some work on your part. It's a two-way street. Just like when you go to a provider and you have an escalation path, like, okay, if I don't get a response from this person by this date, I want 5 numbers that I can escalate to. If you really have a true partnership with a cloud provider, they should have the same with you, because you are in a partnership now and you want to make sure that your priorities align. So, I mean, there's a whole host of things, and whoever asked that question, I mean, I'd be happy to elaborate even more on that. But there are quite a few things that I would say, there are misconceptions in the cloud, that I think you need to address.
Great. Okay, we did get some clarification on that first question. So
sure. Okay.
The question is, do you see adoption of premises UC versus cloud UC vary by vertical, and are some verticals more open to cloud than others?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do, and I think just sort of the logical ones would be, financial services, government contractors, healthcare, in areas where data is like really, really paramount, and you really, really have to be careful about what you're doing there. I mean, the hesitation going into the cloud is the greatest, and the demands for security are the greatest. So I would say those 3 industries are really, really probably the most stringent about demanding high security standards and maybe being even more hesitant toward going into the cloud. We certainly see a lot of other organizations saying, hey, this cloud thing's great. Like, retail, I think, is a good example of a company that we see more apt to, to be going into the cloud. Certainly universities, in the university environment, a big, education universities would be a big one that sort of stands out. Like even some energy and utilities, because if you can get, when you have organizations, they have a lot of locations, a lot of small and manned locations. This is kind of an attractive proposition for them. Of course, utilities and energy do have some of the security concerns that the more sensitive industries have. I wouldn't put them quite at that level of defense or financial services or healthcare, but they're probably not at the lowest level either. They do have those concerns. They don't want someone breaking into the utility grid.
All right, great. Well, those are all the questions we have for now.
Great.
So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. Thank you again very much for your time and attention today. Again, I know Robin mentioned it. Please join us for our next webinar on Thursday, April 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern. That will be the small room video conferencing webinar presented by Nemertes Vice President and Services Director Erwin Lazar and myself. And a registration link for that will be posted to our website. If you'd like to follow up with us and our client, please send an email to client-services@nemertes.com. And if you're not a client, please send an email to research@nemertes.com or sales@nemertes.com. Thank you very much, and this concludes the webinar.
Thank you.